One woman swallowed hard, then murmured, "No, it's tomatoes." It was the summer of 1944. Across the Atlantic, Europe starved beneath ruins. Bread lines stretched past broken churches. In the cities of Germany, even weeds were boiled for soup. Yet here, on the other side of the world, there were fields that yielded plenty, not under duress, but by choice. The prisoners had not seen color like this in years, green so alive it almost hurt the eyes. The camp itself was modest. Rows of wooden barracks lined the edge of farmland leased by the U.S. Army. American guards lounged with their rifles slung low, chatting between drags of lucky strikes. They were young, polite, and oddly relaxed. They called the prisoners the ladies, which felt both comforting and insulting. Most of the women had come from shattered hospitals and airfields, where the stench of blood was constant. Now, they were surrounded by open sky and silence. Liesel Engelmann, aged 28, had been a nurse in Hamburg. Her last sight of home was a smoldering skyline and a body she couldn't identify beneath the rubble. When she'd been captured near Naples, she expected the end: execution, starvation, something cruel. Instead, she was handed coffee. Real coffee, not roasted barley. The Americans didn't curse or shove. They simply took her name, gave her a uniform marked PW, and loaded her onto a ship bound for a country she had only known through radio propaganda. Bound for a country she had only known through radio propaganda. The first weeks in Iowa unsettled her. The air was too kind. The food too plentiful. The guards too casual. When she looked through the fence at the civilians nearby, she saw people who lived as if war were an ocean away. Perhaps she thought it was. But the greatest shock came one afternoon when she noticed a patch of earth near a farmhouse, tidy rows of vegetables growing beside the front porch. She'd stared for a long time, then asked one of the guards, a young man with freckles and a clean uniform, "Why do they plant food if there are stores?" He laughed, glancing toward the fields. "That's a victory garden, ma'am. Everyone's got one. Keeps us fed, keeps the boys overseas fed too." He said it with a lightness that struck her. In Germany, people gardened to survive. Here, they gardened to help others. At dusk, the prisoners gathered near the wire fence, drawn by the glow of lanterns across the fields. Liesel's bunkmate, Marta, traced the barbs with her fingers. "Do you think they suffer like we did?" she whispered. Liesel watched an American mother lift her daughter onto her shoulders to reach for an apple. The girl's laughter floated through the air, almost too delicate to bear. "No," she said quietly. "They don't suffer here. They grow." The narrator inside history might say it was a small moment, a forgotten one, but for these women it was a revelation. Behind them were years of propaganda insisting that the Allies were monsters, greedy, decadent, soulless. Yet nothing about the women in aprons and straw hats looked monstrous. They looked content. There were no soldiers patrolling their homes, no smoke on the horizon, no shrieking sirens. Only soil, sun, and order. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the plains, the camp loudspeaker crackled with the day's announcement. A new work detail was forming, 5 women to assist on a local farm. The guards asked for volunteers. Liesel's hand rose almost involuntarily. The others followed, curious, cautious. It was not courage that guided them, but hunger, not for food, but for meaning. That night, in the barracks, the women spoke in hushed tones. Marta brushed her hair with trembling fingers. "What if they hate us? What if they make us dig until our hands bleed?" Another voice answered, half a laugh, half a prayer, "Then at least it will be clean work. Better than waiting." The laughter rippled briefly, then faded into silence. Outside, crickets hummed beneath the wire fence. Liesel lay awake long after lights out, staring at the wooden ceiling. She could still see the garden through her mind's eye, rows of beans curling upward as if the earth itself wanted to touch the sky. In Germany, the earth had turned against them. Here, it seemed to forgive. She wondered if forgiveness could be planted, too. The next morning, as the truck waited near the gate, the women lined up in their gray uniforms. The air smelled of dew and hay. A guard checked their names and motioned toward the open hay. A guard checked their names and motioned toward the open bed of the truck. Beyond it, the horizon shimmered, vast, golden, endless. The women climbed in, each gripping the side rail as though stepping into another world. As the engine rumbled to life, one of them turned to Liesel. "Do you think they'll let us eat what we pick?" Liesel looked at the sun rising over the fields, the same sun that had burned her city to ash. "Maybe," she said softly, "if we learn how they grow it." The truck rolled forward, past the barbed wire and the guard tower, past the line that divided war from peace. The camera of history would linger there a moment, on the fence, still gleaming in the light, still humming with tension. On one side, women scarred by loss. On the other, gardens alive with color and calm. The distance between them was no more than 20 yards, yet it might as well have been an ocean. Somewhere behind the truck, the radio played again. Moonlight Serenade, fading into the morning air. The narrator's voice, calm and measured, carried the weight of what was to come. In the months ahead, they would touch the same soil as their captors. And what they found there would change, not only how they saw America, but how they saw themselves. The sound of the truck disappeared down the road, swallowed by wind and sunlight. The fence remained, glinting in the quiet, dividing not just nations, but two ways of believing in the world. The truck rattled down a gravel road that cut through miles of farmland, the tires grinding against stones as morning light spilled over the prairie. The air smelled of alfalfa and sunlight, and for the first time in years, Liesel felt warmth that wasn't from fire. Around her, the other women sat in silence, each lost in private memories of hunger and loss. When the truck stopped, the sound of cicadas filled the air like a song from another world. The driver, a young American with a polite smile, jumped down, motioned for them to follow, and pointed to a spread of land that seemed to stretch forever. "This," he said simply, "is where you'll be helping." Before them lay a small miracle, rows upon rows of green, the soil dark and rich, every plant lined with precision. Between the rows moved American women in cotton dresses and wide straw hats, their sleeves rolled, their laughter easy. Some carried woven baskets filled with bright red tomatoes, others balanced jars of jam on tables shaded by apple trees. Liesel froze. Her mind could not reconcile this peace with the war she had left behind. There were no soldiers barking orders, no air raid sirens, no children crying in rubble. Only the rhythmic sound of hands working the earth. A tall woman in her 40s approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're the helpers from the camp?" she asked. Her tone was brisk, but not unkind. The interpreter stepped forward, translating. The woman nodded, looked at their thin faces, and added, "Well, we can use the help. Tomatoes don't pick themselves." She gestured toward a patch where ripe fruit glistened under the sun. "Start there. And be gentle with the stems, they bruise easy." Liesel knelt by the plants, feeling the soil crumble between her fingers. It was soft and cool, nothing like the scorched dirt of bombed-out Germany. She picked one tomato, then another, placing them carefully into a wooden crate. The scent rose, sharp, sweet, alive. A memory flickered. Her mother stirring soup before the war, humming softly while a young Liesel watched. She had forgotten that such a smell could exist. Beside her, Marta worked quickly, muttering under her breath. "In Hamburg we had no gardens left. Only walls of ash." Her voice cracked. "And here, even the weeds look fed." Liesel wanted to answer but couldn't. The injustice of abundance pressed on her chest. She thought of her patients in the hospital, their bodies shrinking by the day, and here, fat pumpkins and golden corn. The American woman who oversaw them, Mrs. Carter, moved between rows, checking their baskets. She spoke in short, cheerful phrases. "You girls are doing fine. Careful with that vine." "That's right." Her son, no older than 10, followed behind her, handing the POWs glasses of lemonade. When he offered one to Liesel, she hesitated. "It's just sugar and lemons," he said, his accent bright with innocence. She took it, the cold glass biting against her palm. "Thank you," she whispered. He grinned. "You're welcome, ma'am." The narrator's voice might have said, in that moment the front line moved, quietly, invisibly, through kindness. As the day passed, they worked side by side with the locals. The Americans sang songs, simple, rhythmic tunes about hope and harvest. One of the POWs, a red-haired radio operator named Ilsa, whispered the translation to the others. "Dig for victory, sow for freedom." They exchanged glances, half amused, half bewildered. In Germany, such slogans were shouted through megaphones, heavy with threat. Here, they were sung under sunlight. During a brief rest, Liesel overheard Mrs. Carter talking to another farmer's wife. "We grow because it's our duty," the woman said. "The soldiers need it. The country needs it. And it keeps us busy so we don't think too much." Her words struck Liesel deeply. This was war, too, but a gentler one. A war waged with seeds and patience. By noon, the women were exhausted but strangely content. When lunch came, cornbread, boiled eggs, and fresh cucumbers, they sat under the shade of a barn. The Americans shared their food without hesitation. One older farmer passed around a jar of pickles, saying, "Eat up. You'll need strength to finish that row." Marta looked at him cautiously, then took one. "Why are they kind to us?" she murmured. Liesel answered quietly, "Maybe they don't see us as the enemy anymore." After the meal, a group of local children approached the POWs. Their curiosity had overcome their parents' warnings. "Are you real Germans?" one girl asked, clutching a doll. Ilsa nodded. "Yes, real." The child studied her face, then smiled. "You look like my teacher." The simplicity of the moment disarmed everyone. A few of the guards watching from the fence looked away, embarrassed by their own emotion. That afternoon, the light softened. Bees hummed lazily over the blossoms. Liesel's arms ached, but she didn't mind. As she reached for another tomato, she caught sight of Mrs. Carter kneeling a few rows down, her hands deep in the soil. The woman's face was lined from sun and wind, but her movements were tender, almost reverent. Liesel realized then that these gardens were not displays of luxury, they were acts of endurance. The war might have been distant, but its echo was here too. Ration books, empty shelves, sons away at the front. The gardens were America's quiet defiance, its proof that creation could still triumph over destruction. For the German women, it was the first time they saw power expressed through peace. As the sun began to set, the women loaded crates into the truck. The horizon glowed pink and gold. Mrs. Carter stood beside Liesel, brushing dirt from her skirt. "You all did good today," she said. "Hard work makes good people, no matter where they come from." Liesel nodded, unsure how to reply. The woman added softly, "Maybe when this is all over, you'll plant your own." The words lingered long after they returned to the camp. That night, in the barracks, the air was thick with the scent of soil and something else, possibility. Marta lay on her cot, whispering into the dark. "Do you think Germany could ever look like this again?" Liesel turned, eyes open. "Only if someone decides to grow, instead of burn." Outside, the guards made their rounds. Fireflies drifted above the fields beyond the fence, tiny sparks in the darkness. Somewhere far off, the faint hum of a tractor blended with the chirping of crickets. The world felt impossibly wide, and for the first time since capture, the women felt something close to calm. But in that calm lay a new kind of fear, one that came not from bombs, but from understanding. Because to see abundance so close, while knowing your own people starved, was a wound no ration could heal. Liesel sat up, looking toward the faint lights beyond the barbed wire. Tomorrow they would return to those gardens again, to the land that smelled of both kindness and guilt. She pressed her hand against the wooden wall and whispered into the dark, "So much food, and still, the world is hungry." The night breeze slipped through the cracks of the barracks, carrying the scent of ripened fruit from beyond the fence. And though no one spoke of it aloud, they all knew, Their captivity had begun to change them. What they had seen that day wasn't just farmland. It was proof that another way of living existed. And that realization, for women raised in ruin, was both beautiful and unbearable. The morning fog hung low over the fields like a veil, the world painted in shades of pearl and gray. When the truck doors swung open, the women climbed down one by one, their breath visible in the cool air. The scent of damp earth rose up, rich and grounding. A rooster crowed somewhere across the field. Rows of corn stalks, tall and hushed, reached into the mist like sentinels. It was early autumn now, America's harvest season, and the work that awaited them was not just labor, but something heavier, proof of a world that still thrived while their own lay in ruins. Liesel adjusted her worn gloves and took in the scene. Ahead stood a group of farmers, broad-shouldered men with weathered faces and quiet eyes. Their clothes were patched, their hands dark with soil, but their posture carried the calm strength of people who had never lost a home to bombs. One of them, a gray-haired man with a kind face, nodded toward the German women. "We'll start with the potatoes," he said simply, gesturing to the field. His tone held no malice, only fatigue. "Ground's good today." The women spread out in pairs, guided by the farmers' wives. Kneeling in the dirt, Liesel pressed her fingers into the soil. It was cold and soft, yielding easily. The first potato she unearthed felt almost warm in her hand, a small, living heart pulled from the earth. Around her, the rhythm of work began, shovels scraping, baskets filling, voices murmuring low. No one spoke of the war. For now there was only soil, air, and the shared ache of labor. A boy of perhaps 12 wandered nearby, curiosity overtaking fear. He carried a bucket and watched the prisoners closely, as if they might dissolve into smoke. Liesel met his gaze and smiled tentatively. The boy hesitated, then grinned back, his teeth small and bright. He pointed to her basket and said, "You missed one." She laughed, a soft, startled sound she hadn't made in years. The farmer, seeing this exchange, gave a small nod. "Tommy, keep her company," he said. "Maybe she'll teach you something about work." As hours passed, the rhythm of the day took hold. They began to fall into an unspoken harmony, the Americans digging one row, the Germans another, their movements mirroring each other. When the baskets grew heavy, they lifted them together, wordlessly coordinating. The tension that once hung like barbed wire between them began to loosen, replaced by something quieter, more human. Marta, working beside an older farmer's wife named Ruth, was the first to speak more than necessary. "In Germany," she said softly, "we had a garden too. My husband planted beans. Then, there were no beans." Ruth looked up, her blue eyes steady. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "We lost boys too." Their gazes met across the row of uprooted stalks, and for a moment, the war disappeared. At midday, the women were invited to eat. They sat under a tall oak, its leaves gold and rust-colored. A picnic was laid out on an old blanket, biscuits, boiled eggs, apples, and thick slices of ham. The farmers' wives insisted they eat first. One woman even passed around coffee in tin mugs. The aroma made the POWs nearly dizzy. Liesel hesitated, unsure whether she was allowed, until the gray-haired farmer pressed a mug into her hands. "Coffee's not a weapon," he said. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes, the words sinking deep. For a while there was laughter, small, uncertain, but real. The sound carried across the fields like birdsong. Even the guards watching from a distance seemed to soften, leaning against the fence posts, sharing cigarettes. The narrator of history, unseen, might have whispered, "In that hour, peace rehearsed itself quietly, while war still raged across an ocean." But beneath the warmth of the sun and the kindness of strangers, an ache still lived in the German women's hearts. Liesel felt it as she glanced at the abundance around her, the overflowing baskets, the shining fruit, the endless fields. How could one land hold so much life while another drowned in hunger? She thought of her younger brother, who had died of malnutrition in 1942. The bitterness that had dulled with time now pulsed again, sharp and raw. She looked down at the potato in her hand, dirt clinging to its skin, and felt a strange fury. The same earth that gave so freely here had refused to feed her family there. Later that afternoon, a storm threatened. The horizon darkened, and the wind turned restless. The Americans and Germans worked faster, side by side, to finish the last rows. When the first drops fell, they didn't run. They stayed, laughing as the rain soaked their hair and clothes. Ruth pulled off her apron and tossed it over a basket to protect the harvest. Liesel looked up, letting the rain hit her face. For a moment it washed away everything, the shame, the guilt, the ghosts of war. She was just a woman under the sky, alive. When the storm passed, the world glistened. Mud clung to their boots, and the air smelled of renewal. The farmers invited them into the barn to dry off. A fire burned in the stove, and steam rose from their sleeves as they warmed their hands. The boy, Tommy, handed Liesel a towel. "You work hard," he said shyly. She smiled. "You too." Then, after a pause, he added, My dad says good people grow good food." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Maybe the earth knows who's kind," she murmured. Before dusk, they loaded the day's harvest into a wagon. As they climbed back into the truck, Mrs. Carter appeared at the gate, carrying a small paper bag. She handed it to Liesel. Inside was a single red apple. "For you," she said. Liesel blinked. "Why?" The woman shrugged. "Because you looked like you needed sweetness more than the rest of us." As the truck pulled away, the women sat in silence. Liesel turned the apple over in her hands, its skin smooth and shining like glass. Marta whispered, "Will you eat it?" Liesel shook her head. "Not yet." She gazed out the window as the farm receded into the distance. The sun broke through the clouds one last time, gilding the wet fields and light. Back at camp, she placed the apple on her bunk and stared at it until nightfall. Around her, the others drifted to sleep, their breathing slow and even. The apple seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight, a small, impossible symbol of kindness from the enemy. When the lights went out, Liesel reached for it but stopped short. She didn't want to eat it. She wanted to remember it, that someone had given, without reason, in a world built on taking. Outside, the wind moved through the cornfields like the whisper of another language. Beyond the fence, unseen in the dark, new shoots were breaking the soil where rain had fallen. Liesel lay awake listening, her hands still smelling faintly of earth. She had not prayed in years, but that night she did, not for victory, not for escape, but for understanding. And as she drifted toward sleep, one thought returned again and again, quiet but unshakable. If enemies can share the same soil, perhaps the soil itself remembers peace better than people do. The war ended quietly for the women in Iowa. There were no parades, no flags snapping in the wind, only a stillness that settled over the fields like an exhale. One morning, the guards didn't bark orders. The loudspeaker didn't crackle. Instead, a rumor rippled through the camp. Germany had surrendered. For a long while, no one spoke. The women stood in the yard beneath a sky pale with dawn, staring at the horizon as though waiting for something to appear. Somewhere beyond the wire, the corn was turning gold. Liesel didn't cheer. She couldn't. Surrender was supposed to mean freedom, but she felt only weight. The others wept or prayed, clutching one another as if to stay upright. Marta knelt in the dirt, whispering, "It's over," again and again, like she was trying to convince herself. The guards removed their rifles and leaned them against the fence. The word "ladies" still startled them, gentle, alien, undeserved. In the weeks that followed, the camp changed. Watchtowers were empty, rules loosened, fences less guarded. Some women were allowed to walk into town under supervision, helping with post-harvest chores. Others wrote letters that would never reach their families, unsure if anyone remained to receive them. For the first time, silence became unbearable. Liesel spent her days staring out toward the farm where they had once worked, the rows of vegetables now heavy with summer's last offering. One afternoon, Mrs. Carter appeared at the gate holding a basket. One afternoon, Mrs. Carter appeared at the gate holding a basket. She had heard the news too and brought what she called a peace gift: fresh bread, honey, and apples. When the gate opened, the prisoners gathered hesitantly. Mrs. Carter's hands trembled slightly as she placed the basket down. "You helped us grow," she said, eyes glistening. "Seems right you should share in what came of it." Her voice caught, and she turned quickly back toward her truck, embarrassed by her own emotion. Later that evening, the women divided the food. Liesel held one of the apples, bright red, identical to the one she had once refused to eat. This time she took a bite. The taste flooded her mouth, sweet, clean, alive. Marta watched her and whispered, "You'll remember that forever." Liesel nodded, unable to speak. Days passed, and word arrived that repatriation had begun. The women would soon be sent back to Germany, though no one knew what awaited them there. Some were afraid to return to a country that no longer resembled the one they'd left. Others longed for it desperately, even in ruins. The night before their departure, Liesel walked alone to the edge of the fence. The air smelled of clover and smoke from distant farmhouses. Beyond the wire, the Victory Gardens still thrived, glowing faintly under the moonlight. She could hear faint laughter from a porch, the clinking of dishes, a life continuing. She knelt by the fence and pressed her hand to the soil. "You fed her hand to the soil. You fed us," she whispered. "You showed us what peace looks like." The earth was cool, alive. A small beetle crawled over her finger, unconcerned with nations or wars. She let it go and watched it vanish among the root. At dawn, trucks lined up outside the camp. The women carried what little they owned: small satchels, folded blankets, memories too heavy to pack. Before climbing aboard, Liesel looked one last time toward the field. She saw Mrs. Carter standing near her barn, shading her eyes with her hand. Liesel lifted her arm in a faint wave. The woman waved back, smiling through tears. No words were exchanged. None were needed. As the convoy rolled away, the prisoners fell into a strange quiet. The road curved through farmland painted with morning mist. Here and there, farmers worked the fields, their movements slow, steady, eternal. The women watched through the truck's narrow windows. Marta murmured, "They'll never know how strange it felt to be treated as human again." Liesel turned her head. "Maybe that's the point," she said softly. "Maybe humanity is supposed to be ordinary." The narrator's voice, if one could hear it, might have carried a solemn truth. They had arrived as soldiers of a broken nation. They left as witnesses to something greater than victory. When they reached the port, the ships waited like gray specters. Liesel lingered on the dock, staring at the water's surface. It was calm, reflecting the sky in silver ripples. The freckled guard approached, offering her a small envelope. "From Mrs. Carter," he said. Inside was a folded note, written in careful script. "Plant something when you get home. It's the only way the world ever starts again." She held the note for a long time, reading it until the letters blurred. Around her, the women boarded quietly, their boots clattering on the gangway. Liesel slipped the note into her pocket. When she looked back one last time, the shoreline had already begun to blur into distance. The voyage home took weeks. The sea was cold and nights were long. The women huddled together, trading stories and dreams. Marta spoke often of rebuilding her garden. "Even if it's just one pot," she said, "I'll plant beans again. I have to." Liesel listened, thinking of the Iowa soil, the warmth of the sun, the laughter of a boy named Tommy who had said good people grow good food. When the ship finally reached Europe, the sight that met them was not home but a scar. The port was half collapsed, buildings hollowed by fire. Germany was no longer the proud, iron nation they had served. It was a graveyard of dust and hunger. The women stood on the dock, silent. No one came to greet them. The Red Cross distributed thin blankets and directions to refugee stations. As they walked inland, the air smelled of soot and rain. Children picked through rubble for metal scrap. A stray dog barked. Life, thin and defiant, clung to every corner. Life, thin and defiant, clung to every corner. That night, Liesel found herself in the ruins of what had once been a church. The roof was gone, but a few wooden pews remained. She sat there, the silence pressing close. From her pocket, she drew out Mrs. Carter's note. The words glowed faintly in the moonlight. Plant something. She looked around, at the cracked tiles and the blackened altar, and thought, why not here? The next morning, she scavenged a patch of ground near the church step. It was gray and brittle, but she dug anyway, using a broken spoon as her spade. When she finished, she pressed into the soil a handful of seeds she had hidden during her last day in Iowa, seeds from a tomato, carefully dried and wrapped in cloth. She didn't know if they would grow. She only knew she had to try. Weeks later, a single green shoot broke through the dirt. Thin as a thread, trembling in the wind, but alive. Liesel knelt beside it, tears sliding down her face. Around her, the city groaned with rebuilding, but here, in this forgotten patch of soil, something pure was taking root. If someone had walked by just then, they might have seen a woman smiling through tears at a scrap of green, whispering to it as if to a child. What they wouldn't know is that she was whispering thanks, to the women in aprons, to the boy with the lemonade, to the enemy who taught her that peace, like a garden, must be tended every single day. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain across the broken city. Liesel lifted her face toward it and closed her eyes. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang for the first time since the surrender. And in that sound was a truth she would never forget. Victory could conquer armies, but only kindness could feed the world.